Okay, welcome to the Scrutiny Programme Committee. We start off with apologies. Bridge, who we had apologies from?
We've had apologies from Councillor Clive Lloyd, Chair, and Councillor Chris Holly. I'm not sure if he's present. If he's not, he's asked us to take apologies.
I don't think he is here, no. Okay, and we've had one change to the committee. Councillor Hannah Lawson has replaced Councillor Jen Rayner, but I don't think she's actually present, so I'll have to welcome her for the next meeting. Right, disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest. I'm going to start off. I have a personal and prejudicial interest in item 5, and I will withdraw from the meeting for that item, and Councillor Peter Jones has volunteered to take over, and I see Hannah Lawson has now joined us, so can I welcome Hannah to the committee? As well, okay, Hannah, and I'll be declaring interest. I got personal prejudice in item 5, and I withdraw from that item. Anybody else wish to declare any interest at all? No. Okay. So item 3 is prohibition of whipped votes and declaration of party whips. We want to say anything about that? No. Okay. In that case, we're going to move on to the minutes. I'm going to go through these minutes for accuracy, starting with page 1. Page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. Can we accept those as an accurate record?
I propose you, Chairman.
And Wendy's just seconded. Thank you, everybody. Right, next item is item 5, which is public question time, and I'm going to leave the meeting and hand over to Peter Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Can I elect a chair pro tem? I know Peter's volunteered, but if I could just go through the process of electing a chair pro tem just for the item. Can I have some nominations, please?
Nominate Peter Jones.
Thank you very much. And a seconder?
Do that.
Second.
That's great. If everyone's in favour, can they say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
There we go. Thank you. And if Councillor Jones, you want to proceed? Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. I didn't realise it would be such a formal process. Good heavens. Power for a few minutes. But thank you, everyone. This item, of course, is number 5, public question time. And I know that we've had 2 questions from members of the public. And the first is from Sian Morgan. Is Sian Morgan present? No? In which case, I'll read the question. I know that Mark Thomas, who will presumably have to answer it, will have seen it, but I will read the question. We are residents of Green Close. Due to the ongoing construction of the cycle path on Mayles Road, a pedestrian island has been taken away at the end of our road, and we understand it will not be replaced. We are joining the meeting today to request that we have the crossing reinstated. We believe that safety and accessibility will be seriously compromised if a replacement is not put in place. Councillor Mark Thomas, I think that's probably down to you to answer, is it?
Yes,
Chair,
well,
sorry, Chair.
Yeah,
sorry, I think Sian has joined us.
Oh, apologies to Sian. Sian, I've just read your question. Do you wish to add anything to it?
Hi there, sorry, I'm very sorry for just logging in a bit late today. Thank you very much for having me today. I'd just like to add a little bit, if you don't mind, please. Our question's in relation to the ongoing construction of the cycle path along Mayles Road. Mayles Road feeds Gower. It's got a huge array of vehicles on it. Cars, HGVs, caravans, campers. It's not uncommon to see huge co-op HGVs or farm feeds HGVs coming along this road at great speed. At the end of Green Close, we have had a pedestrian island taken away, and we understand it's not to be replaced. We are joining the meeting today to request that we have a crossing reinstated. We believe that safety and accessibility will be compromised if a replacement is not put in place. Through previous correspondence, we've been informed that in the finished scheme, the highway width would be consistent along the length of the majority of the route at 6 metres. This designed to slow vehicle speeds, and this together with the narrower crossing distance will be a benefit to pedestrians seeking to cross the road. Now, we live in the area, and we must share with you that we don't believe that the traffic will be slowed by narrowing the road. And to date, the residents haven't witnessed any slowing of the vehicle speeds. I'm nearly there. So by not replacing the crossing in the area, we think that there are major safety and accessibility issues for the pedestrians. Safety of the pedestrians crossing the road is seriously compromised because we do not have a safe crossing now. This includes crossing the children crossing the road to use at least 6 feeder buses in the morning and the afternoon, users of the local bus service, users of the Klein Park, and it's an entrance just opposite, and not forgetting just general road crossings. One of the residents in Green Close has sadly witnessed a friend who was hit by a car, went over the bonnet when she was at school. And we've got to note that school uniforms are dark on a very, very dark morning and afternoons of children's coming home. Also, at the actual point where the crossing is, when the sun is low, visibility is very, very much reduced. There is a very small spot where we do lose visibility just for that fraction of a second, and I would hate to think what might happen should there's not that vehicle speed being slowed down. So accessibility we also feel has reduced. Removal of the island has reduced the confidence of our local residents. Just in our close, this is not even stepping over to the other side of Males. We've got visually impaired residents, we have elderly residents, and they have actually come up to me and said that they actually are nervous to now cross the road and certainly use Klein. And then my final bit really is just that we've now got a cycle path, 2 lanes of traffic and a cycle path the other side to cross. And I just really, really hope today that you could acknowledge our concerns. I'd really, really love to speak for the people in Green Close today, and just to recognise that a pedestrian island that was there was actually put there originally because we needed it, because it was a safety aspect. The initial plans, I believe, actually showed that the island would be kept. And we just would really love it if you could consider reinstating a crossing within the midsection of Males Road. I'm really sorry, I've just run to the meeting, I can hardly speak. But thank you very much for hearing me today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean, for setting the whole thing in context. I think Councillor Mark Thomas, who is responsible for highways, will answer your query. Mark, please.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Sean, for the question. Yes, initially the traffic island was put there, with the road being what it was. I mean, the road was formerly, prior to the adjustment of the road, 8 metres wide, and it was not uncommon to see speeding traffic on that road. And at the time, a risk assessment was done, as is standard in any of these situations, and it was felt that a traffic island was needed and required to suit those road conditions at that time. Now, the dilemma we've had, as we're all known, and it's very much been in the public domain, when we're trying to develop a shared use path along Males Road and many other places, we have to very often try to compromise and make adjustments as we go along to try and, both get the required width and requirements for the active travel route, but also then to accommodate and work around trees, for example, and try not to cut down trees, where we can, and try and accommodate lots of issues raised by residents and representatives of the community. Now, the position and the problem we've got at the moment is, because of the construction of the cycle route and the shared use route, the road width will be reduced to 6 metres, which is our minimum requirement. So because the road width is 6 metres, we cannot have a traffic island in the middle of that road, because it constricts the permissible road width for vehicles. So we've had to remove it. It's not something we want to do or have just boldly just removed it. It's because we cannot fit vehicle into traffic and the active travel route into that part of the network. So we've removed it and are removing it. But the commitment I can give is that we will be monitoring. We're not removing it and walking away from it. We will be assessing it after construction of the path. And I can assure you this: if any remedial action is required, the reinstatement of any method to enable safe crossing of that, we very much will look at that favourably to do that. So, but as Sian highlighted, you know, I know we've issued previous correspondence to a number of concerned residents, and one of the factors we believe is that the narrowing of the road. I know we talk about the speed of and volume of traffic there today, but the narrowing of a road is a natural traffic calming method, proved and tested, you know, in many situations, and it by default, it will slow the traffic down because it doesn't give that freedom or ability for people to put their foot down when they reach a wide open space on the road. So it will restrict the speed of traffic, and we then have to check and monitor to see whether that in itself solves the problem or we still need to take further measures. But we are prepared. We've got a very open mind on this, and if further safety measures for pedestrian safety are required, that's something we will commit to do.
If I could just ask though, certainly because I know that I've done quite a bit of research into looking at narrowing roads and what research has showed for slowing vehicle speeds, and yes, what I've read is that it does say that, but it goes alongside some very important traffic speed restrictions. But one of the things that keeps coming up predominantly is that it works very well where you haven't got HGVs on the road. And I think what my concern is that, yes, I obviously, you know, I'm a teacher, I don't deal with the roads normally, but I just I do feel that we are not seeing any slowing of this vehicle speed, and what I'm very fearful of is that we're going to have very, very large vehicles going up and down Mills Road. So we're not talking about small cars, we're not talking about just the everyday traffic that you'd have, and they're not going to be able to stop in, you know, quick enough for when we've got children crossing that path. And that is something that really does concern us as residents, and of course the other side of Mills as well. So that is something that I would really like down on record, is that because we see the traffic that goes up and down that road, you know, we live there. So
thank you, Sian. Is that okay?
Yeah, can I just ask one last thing then, please? So if you're going to assess it, how will you do that, and how soon will you start assessing the traffic, and what's your plan along those lines, because you say that you're going to assess it?
Yeah, I haven't got dates in place. I know that, you know, after the project is completed, we will do, you know, our normal road safety assessments of any completed project to make sure that everything's working. I don't know that Mark is on the call here. He may be able to step in and advise on actual dates for any future road assessments. Mark Thomas. He's our highways manager and responsible for this area of work, but he may be able to answer it. But I'm sorry, John, at this moment I can't give you a commitment. But if Mark isn't able to answer it, I can certainly something I can get and respond to in writing.
I'd be really grateful. Thank you. That would be really lovely. Thanks very much.
Mark, are you able to make any contribution? Mark,
yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, Sian, what happens is that there's a process called a stage 3 road safety audit. That's undertaken by a trained road safety auditor, and stage 3 happens at completion. So as soon as the contractor notifies us that everything is complete in terms of all the signing, lining, then the road safety audit will be done straight after that, and that's take a couple of weeks to complete. So as soon as the scheme's completed, that's what will happen.
Okay. All right then. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I think that's been a useful discussion, and I hope, Sian, I know it hasn't satisfied you in all probability, but I think it's shown that the council is very concerned and aware of the nature of the problem and will be monitoring it. Thank you very much. So we now move on to the second question from Hugh Francis, or is it Ben Francis?
I'm using his computer.
Hello, Hugh Francis.
It's Hugh Francis. I'm using Ben's computer.
Oh, that's
apologies.
Right. Yeah, carry on.
Fine. You've got the written question before you. Do you want me just to read it out, or?
I think so. It's helpful. Yes.
Okay. Figures published by the council show that it has failed to achieve its own housing target in each of the last 10 years by a cumulative margin of approximately 50%. Contractors and developers believe that delays in the Highways Department is a significant contributor to this failure. To what extent does Councillor Thomas think that the Highway Department can improve its service to address this shortcoming?
Mark?
Yes, well, the council and developers meet regularly, as Hugh knows, as part of the Developers Forum to work collaboratively in order to address any issues that are of concern to the industry. In relation to the alleged specific service failures on this particular instance that he was referring to, then these are best dealt with through the corporate complaints process, because they are very specific to a specific development that he was, working on and responsible for. And because of the detail required, the best way to answer that is to go through the complaints process, and then all the items that he wants to refer to can be dealt with through that process.
Mark, I've deliberately avoided talking about specific sites, or our sites in particular, but we feel that right across the board there are shortcomings in this department that need to be addressed. And you were well aware of the complaints we've put in over a period of a number of years, both to yourself and Councillor Rob Stewart and the Chief Executive, but we don't see any improvement in the service. So my question is, to what extent do you think the service can improve to address the problems of the shortage or the provision of shortage of new housing in Swansea?
Well, it's a difficult one to answer here, in the sense that are we acknowledging that there is a problem within the highways department? And I don't outright acknowledge there's a problem with the highways structure in the council. I mean, obviously there are individual problems that occur from time to time on individual developments, but overall, if you take into account the strain on our services across the board with council services over the length of the pandemic, I think we're doing quite a good job, despite, as I said, it tends to be that on individual schemes, there are sometimes problems inherent within those schemes, and that both sides need to try and resolve. But in general, I don't get the sense or the feeling that the industry as a whole has got a problem with Swansea Council Highways Department. And I know, as I said, I know there have been particular issues, but that's normal. It's just like within the planning department, there are often things crop up with individual plans and planning applications. But generally, do we meet the targets required? Are we meeting expectations? And I think generally we are. And we have to take into account, what's been going on in the last 18 months or so, and the strains and stresses. That's really put a test to not only our highways department, but many of the services that we're able to deliver. I mean, it can depend. I mean, I tend to look at it and saying, what a wonderful job we've done as a council across all services in maintaining what we've got. Other people may say that our service levels have slipped, but it's all relative. I think with the backdrop of the pandemic, I tend to think that we've done a terrific job under the circumstances. But that may, I can understand why not everybody perhaps shares that view.
Mark, I understand what you're saying, but the facts as provided by your own department or the council's department show that 10,000 houses were meant to have been built over the last 10 years and only 5,000 have been built. And my assertion is that a lot of that are problems in the planning department, but more so in the highway department. I know on several of our own schemes, the delays that is caused, and we could certainly have built at least another 20 to 30 houses last year if the process had been speeded up. So that leads me to my second question, which is, do you think that Highways Department has sufficient resource available to discharge its statutory functions, as well as support the capital works of the council regeneration projects? You've mentioned that you're under stress, and I can sympathise with that. But the reality is, you've promised as a council 10,000 homes in 10 years, and there was no COVID during those 10 years, and yet you've only just managed to build, or to have built, 5,000. And there has to be a reason for that, and that's what I want to try and test.
But I don't think that the council can accept all responsibility of being 5,000 short. I mean, is that all down to highways? I mean, I don't accept that that's the case.
No, and I accept that.
I
accept that.
Yeah, and so, but I mean, if you look at, if you ask me as cabinet member for highways, are we sufficiently resourced? Well, I would like more resources in all of the service departments that I'm responsible for, right across the board.
The answer is no, Mark, is it?
But no, it's not that we're under-resourced. We are resourced according to the work demand and the budgetary constraints that we have to work with. I mean, all of us on this call would love to throw many more millions. I mean, we can all look at areas where we would like to improve, but we have to work within our budget constraints. But I think under the circumstances, with everything that's going on and the ability to, we do here, as you're aware, if we can't source it from within highways, we have are already established working relationship with consultancies who will come in, and we can utilise them to do some of the work that highways can't respond to at that time. So that's something that gets picked up relatively quickly. But resourcing, extra resourcing is one. In some terms, it's obviously we've got to manage a budget, but two, and I know this, it's not easy just to go out there and grab qualified engineers off the street to come and work for this authority. They're not about. So in many cases, we are looking at training our own and bringing our own in and training them up to do these jobs. But it's a challenge. As I said, it's not just focused on lack of resources or lack of money, but the availability of qualified labour to be able to fill some of these gaps, and that's why we do rely on outside agencies.
Well, that brings me to my third question, Mark, which is there scope to further outsource technical services to external consultants to help improve the service? And I sympathise with your lack of budget and all the rest of it, but the reality is our business is building new homes, and we are telling you quite genuinely that we are failing to do that because of delays in this department. Now, if there is a possibility of outsourcing that work to external consultants, that would be a huge help, a step forward, which would also help the council to meet its own target for the provision of new houses. Yeah,
and that's something we are doing. We do use external resources, to help us out when we get the peaks when we get the peaks. Obviously, for most of the time we can manage it, but we're not adverse to going outside. And the difficulty you've got is if you've got a constant workload that's higher than you can manage with constantly, then obviously it's looking for more resources in-house to help deal with that extra demand. But it's like a lot of things fluctuate, and we get periods perhaps of high demand that we can't manage, and that's something we look to outsource. But for the rest of the time, it's something that we can do within the team. So it's not as simple as saying, "Oh, we're busy at the moment, let's bring people in." To bring people in, to recruit people on a permanent basis to help you with a permanent level of work requires that permanent demand. And it does, when it does reach those figures, we do look to recruit people. But obviously, if it's the odd peak here and there, it's easier to sometimes bring in or outsource some of this work.
So, Mark, your response is that there is a possibility to get more work outsourced to external professionals.
That's what's required. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Thanks. That's all. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you, Hugh. I think that concludes item 5 on public question time. And I'd like to invite Councillor Peter Black back into the meeting to resume the chair for the remainder of this meeting. Peter.
We'll just wait a moment, Chair, for Councillor Black to rejoin. I've just sent him a request to join.
Okay, thanks, Bridge.
And I'm here.
Well,
Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter.
no worries.
Okay, right. We're going to move on to item 6 now, which is the scrutiny of the Cabinet member with responsibility for highways, engineering, infrastructure, repairs and maintenance. Welcome, Mark. Also welcome to Mark Thomas and Bob Fennick, and I think Stuart Davies has sent apologies. I think he's on leave. So, Mark, do you want to briefly introduce your paper?
Yes, if you will, Chair. Look, I'll just go through it. I mean, I know there's a lot of questions. So, look, all members of the committee will have read it, and I'm sure will have questions. So I won't go through it verbatim, but I'll look through the salient points to see, that I want to draw out of the report and highlight. But obviously, then happy to answer any questions on it. I mean, the general description is basically talks about what we do, the maintenance regimes, etc. The areas that this section covers effectively, I'm responsible for. Section 1.2 is the highway asset, what we are responsible for, and the areas of, and if you notice there in replacement value, if we had to replace on a like-for-like basis our highway network, we're in the region of 2 billion. Hopefully that'll never come, but never say never. And then why do we do it? Obviously, there's highways acts and things, there's legislation that requires us to carry out this work. It's something we do, but it's something we legislatively have to do as well. Management to support, and this talks about the number of employees and what their roles are within the services. And then the stakeholders, obviously, there's a whole host of stakeholders who have an interest in our highway network, least of all residents as well, So the finance then, going on to the finance, in this year in the budget is, maintenance budget is 3.9 million, but This year, as we have done also in the previous 3 years, we have contributed an extra 1.4 as a result of the commissioning report that was carried out some years ago. It was highlighted of the shortfall on the continuing backlog of maintenance on our highways. So this is the 4th of 4 years. I think it's, the 4th of 4 years. So we've put an extra contribution of £1.4 million per annum in to this much needed resource. And it's also been supported by Welsh Government grant allocation as well. So that's been very helpful and very useful to be able to help us tackle some of that backlog and to bring some work forward. The current performance trends, they're all about, the way the service is going and how it's improving. And then notable management practice. Interesting. I mean, there's one point I want to draw attention to. In we always have a 5-year program. The current 5-year program we had started in 2020 and it runs from 2025. An indication of what this extra funding, for example, brings is that we're already a year in advance on that program. So what we do is the program of works is still there, but the intention or the hope is that we will complete that instead of 5 years, 4 years, and then we will start a new 5-year rolling program. It's just a continuous roll, but that's a good example of what you might ask, what does the extra 1.4 million do? Well, that's a typical, it enables to shorten this. So, if there was a highway needed resurfacing, it was scheduled for 2025, that'll now be done in 24. So it's all, pluses. We then talk about the drainage review. Highlight on that is obviously, look, we all recognise the impact on the heavy rainfall on our roads and infrastructure, and we are not averse to. We've noticed that obviously as an authority, and we've already brought in an extra gully tanker to catch up with some of the drain clearing, and we are continuing to look at putting extra resources into this service as we speak. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to fund some more additions to this service, because it clearly is a focus of attention now, and it's going to remain a focus of attention with global warming, climate change, call it whatever you will, but that is clearly something that appears to be here to stay. And these heavy downpours, heavy periods of rain, where our infrastructure cannot cope with it effectively, is something that most of us believe is here for some time yet. So our expectations within highways is these flooding issues are going to be around for some time. Well, I mean, I'm not a scientist and neither are the officers, but that believes we're in some sort of trend there. Okay, so and that's the way we are setting up our forward look in response to that, what we believe, as I said, is a trend. Work during the pandemic. Now, it is an opportunity, as I always try and do, is praise our officers and staff for, we touched on earlier on about with Hugh Francis about the fact that, the resources are stretched. But throughout this period, the pandemic, our resources didn't stop for a minute. We had to shift our emphasis sometimes, and we try to keep away from particularly resurfacing things like pavements and that. We try to avoid doing that in built up areas because of the pandemic and close working in residential areas. And we moved it to the more outlying areas like parts of Gower, Mawr and less populated areas. But the guys were fleet of foot. They looked to do this instead of saying, oh, we can't go in these areas. They just diverted to the resources so that it was in more acceptable areas where not high footfall and high density of residential areas. And that was a fantastic move. And one of the it's in the report there as well, for example, is the Lacha Bridge. We saw that obviously during the early stages of the pandemic, the traffic movements over Lacha Bridge and everywhere else were at a record low. And that programme, I believe, was brought forward 2 years. Lacha Bridge was down in our 5-year programme to be done. But we used the opportunity of very little traffic at the time to do that, because can you imagine the chaos that would be served if we closed Lacha Bridge for a month now to do major roadworks on it? It would be chaotic. So that was a great, I wish I could claim it. It was not my suggestion or proposal, but officers, as I said, fleet of foot, brought that forward. I obviously approved it. They brought it to me and it was approved. But I mean, I want to, give credit to all the teams and officers involved in carrying out the work. And in fact, during the pandemic, we did more surface recovering than the previous year. So, I mean, all hats off to everyone involved in that service, and I'm glad the report gives me a chance to recognise those. Future challenges and opportunities, I'm sure you've all read them, and I don't want to go through them all specifically, but one, I suppose, which is a new one for us all, because there's a lot of the future challenges are there, flooding, etc., will be there. But I suppose an hidden consequence that none of us would have saw, this ward boundary change, the work that involved for officers to just work around that, because it's just different than what they've had. So that's highlighted as it's not a showstopper, but it is something we could have done without, because it does cause complications to that, but something we've got to live with, because it's an edict, that we have to work with. And then moving on to the risks, obviously, I mean, there's always risks with ongoing maintenance backlog and maintenance issues within the highways. And I know I'm trying not to preempt some of the questions that have been forwarded. So I know there are concerns raised over questions but it might be better for me if I answer them directly as part of the questions that will come, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mark. Very useful overview. Right, so we're going to questions. I've got a list of questions from the pre-meeting. So I'm going to work through those, and then anybody else who wants to come in after that will bring those in as well. So I've got the first question in relation in terms of the backlog of work of about £70 million. Can everybody mute their microphone, their thing, because I think we're getting some feedback, if that's okay. Thank you. We've got a backlog of about £70 million on the roads alone. I was just looking at the capital programme, which you've included there, Mark, is just under £10 million, I think, in 5.1, which obviously is going to be nowhere near to meeting that backlog. We've got a total capital programme for the council of around about £110 million. So I'm just wondering, do you think we're actually prioritising this work sufficiently to start tackling that backlog in terms of the overall expenditure of the council?
Yes, I think, look, I'm not embarrassed by this or defensive about this figure. I know for a lot of people, I think £70 million, good God, what's the council doing almost? But I do remember, I think it was about 2 years ago at Scrutiny, one of the previous Scrutiny meetings I attended. I think then it was something like 74 million. So I do really understand when you talk about figures of this scale, it's massive, but it's probably in line with most other authorities. It is, this is about how much would we need to spend to put all of our roads in A1 condition. It would be a lovely thing to do, but it's not a realistic ask effectively. The condition of our roads are varied, different categories from very good to quite poor, and then we have to prioritize. So I think, yeah, I mean, if you look at the up-to-date figures, I know this was put into the report and a backlog of 70 million, but it's probably closer now to about 61, 62 million because of the extra funding that we put into it. So the up-to-date figure on that is closer to 60 than 70. But, it doesn't change the fact that there's a massive backlog, and we are not trying to shy away from that, Chair. It's just that it is something we have to deal with, but we can't put in, as we chipping away at it, right? And it is reducing the backlog as we speak. As I said, I think it was, don't quote me on the time, but it was about 2 or 3 years ago that it was 74 million. And it is now down effectively closer to, it's about 62 million now as we speak. But that is chipping away, but it's still a big number, and it's still something that is a risk for us. But it's a measured risk, and it's something that, we're not worried about our network collapsing or falling apart beneath our feet, because we are targeting through our priority listing all of the high priority roads and the resurfacing programs that we need to do.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Jeff Jones has given me notice he wants to ask a supplementary to this particular question. Are you there, Jeff?
Yes, I am, yes. And, thanks for that, Mark. It was the figures, really, that I was trying to get my head around. It's good news if you say that the backlog is actually reducing. I was going to ask a question with regards to, you look at this, you calculate things every 5 years. What was it 5 years ago? I must admit, from my darkest memory as well, I thought it was 52 million then, and it actually has gone up to 70 million. And when you actually say it's gone down from 74 to 61 million, but there's only an annual allocation of 3.468 million. I don't know, can we just have clarification at the end of the day? Number one, what it was 5 years ago, and what is the actual figure now, and how was it reduced to 61 million if you've got such a low input into the highways maintenance?
Yeah, look, I'm more than happy to supply you with the detail because, as I said, I'm drawing on my memory here on the 74 million, and I'm drawing on my memory from the time. So I'm quite happy not to be quoted on that but I think, it depends. The 5-year rolling programme does. Yeah, you may be right, Councillor. I've got no doubt, Councillor Jones, that at some time it was 52 million. But whether it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, don't ask me. But I will give you a written response. But just to add to the question about the 3.468 million that we contribute in every year, that's the budget. On top of that, we are adding in the 1.4 million, and Welsh Government funding of nearly 2 million this year has also gone in. So we set a budget, and then we're adding this extra outside of that or on top of that. So the amount going in is far greater than the actual, budget that's allocated for this. So it does chip away. And yeah, I will give you the written figures for that, because all I was doing is giving you an indication of where we are now. As I said, I don't want to say it's 62 million if it's actually 61.5. I'd rather give you that in a written response. Okay, so I'm happy to supply that, Chair.
Okay, I think, Mark, if we let us have the backlog figure at the beginning of the last 5-year programme, the beginning of this 5-year programme, and what you think it is currently, that'll give us a benchmark we can work out where we're going on.
To do that. Yeah, more
that'd be great. That's lovely. Thanks. Right, Peter Jones got a question on impacts of climate change.
Yes, excuse me. Thank you, Chair. First of all, just a note, please, that we do in fact have 6 corporate priorities, not 5 as referenced in the report. And of course, the 6th is indeed maintaining and enhancing Swansea's natural resources and biodiversity, which of course is relevant to highways programmes, although perhaps not for this afternoon's meeting. I'm sure I shall engage Mark on this elsewhere over those kinds of issues. But I do note in paragraph 4.1 of the appendix that both Swansea Environment Forum and of course Natural Resources Wales are listed as stakeholders, and of course that's absolutely right. But I think those issues are for pursuit elsewhere.
I think, to be fair, Peter, that was a report from the Scrutiny people as opposed to Mark. So I think we'll make note of that for future reference.
I'm trying not to point a thing to blame at anybody, but just to point out, if I may, the slight error in the report. But yes, moving on then, under future challenges and opportunities, paragraph 8.1 of the appendix, one of the bullet points refers to increasing challenges due to climate change, and I'm sure that's absolutely right. But I'm just wondering whether, in terms of what we think those challenges might be, we could put a little flesh, if you like, some detail into that list of possible challenges. I think we've already, or Councillor Mark Thomas has already referred to the greater risk of flood due to enhanced and more frequent rainfall events. There's also, I think, a risk to road surface from high temperatures and the like. I just wondered, please, Councillor Mark Thomas, if you could elaborate what you believe those main challenges to be.
Well, you've touched on probably the biggest, well, I don't want to prioritise them, but certainly up there amongst the highest. I mean, you've touched on it again. I mentioned it earlier on, is flooding, the threat of flooding, and the infrastructure that we've got at times cannot cope with it. I mean, everybody says, well, why have we got all this water on the road? It's because the infrastructure, and again, it's not something we're apologising for. We've got, drainage on our roads. That's been there for time immemorial. And, I dread to think the cost of renewing or changing all of that. I mean, it's beyond what we've got at the moment, but that is a real threat ongoing, and we are tackling it in the best way we can by, as I said, making sure that our drains are free flowing, by looking at the gully crew, for example, and things like that. But it's not going to change the amount of rainfall that falls. It's we are looking at the aftermath and the effect of all of this extra rainfall. And it's not just rain. I know, look, I don't need to tell anybody on this call. It's the volume in such a short period of time. That's, within an hour, we are getting like a week's rain sort of thing, and nothing we've got can cope with that. I suppose the other one, yes, is obviously as temperatures heat up, the effect on it has on the tarmac on the roads and things like that, and those sort of issues. But also, you know, if we are going to get wetter or colder winters, certainly wetter winters, does play heck with our surface treatment. You know, it gets under the tarmac. If we get frost or something, then that breaks the surface up tremendously. So there's ongoing maintenance. The other one, obviously, is air quality and air pollution. And, you know, we constantly talk about the need. We somehow or other, between all of us, this is not a council issue. This is a community issue. It's a Welsh issue. It's a UK issue. We somehow have to make this modal change that we all talk about. We've got to get some of these vehicles, or many of these vehicles, off the road for the long-term future of us all. So those are the type of challenges I think we have. They're the key ones, and they have a huge impact on our environmental and our ability to maintain our roads and surfaces, and as I said, on everything we do within our highway structure.
Yeah, we seem to be moving towards what is effectively a Mediterranean climate of hot, dry summers, warm, wet winters.
Yeah.
But within that climate transformation, much more intense rainfall. I think you've indicated that rightly yourself, Mark, that heavy, intense rainfall over short periods with obvious flood consequences. And that's going to be a difficulty, but somehow we're going to have to live with it. Beyond the measures, are there any other measures you can think of that might help us to cope with that?
Well, yes, I suppose what we are doing, and this is what Bob is much more aware of, and has got to, obviously, we are looking for, you know, through SUD's work and sustainable drainage systems and that, and that's what we've got to look at, is finding other ways to deal with this surface water on our roads rather than just put into the drains. What we want is soakaways, effectively, you know, planted areas that can soak up this rainfall through natural means, you know, so, and feed the trees and the plants at the sides of the roads. That's much easier to do on new projects and new areas where we're setting up. But it's a laborious and costly issue to do on existing roads. So we are looking for opportunities when we're doing new projects to plant as many trees and these sustainable drainage systems in along our networks of roads. So that's the future. That's what we need to be looking at, rather than just put them into a pipe and channel them out to sea, you know.
Yeah. And one additional measure that we might want to think about, trying to encourage householders to plant their front gardens, not to concrete them over, but to plant them to both absorb rainfall and to in a sense, reduce the runoff onto the roads themselves. And that's an important measure. I think it's something we need to do. I'll leave that thought. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, artificial grass it comes to mind, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, thanks for that, Peter. Mike White, on street works coordination. Is Mike there?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, Mark, it's a relation on street works and the coordination with utility companies. Obviously, they're allowed to come in and work on the public highway, carry out works. What procedures have you in place in regards to the follow-up with reinstatement works that they carry out to show this up to the standard that it should be in before they obviously have completed the work? And also, how do we ensure that these companies comply with Chapter 8 legislation in regards to signage requirements with the placing and removal of signage, obviously with the lighting and barriers and signs, and to ensure that all street and roadworks are safe for both operators and the public? Yeah,
well, we have got, I mean, through our highways manager, you know, a good working relationship. They meet, our highways officers meet with the utility companies, a representative body, and our highways manager is actually chair of that group. So we have got a good working relationship, but, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say that works out perfectly. So there's a good team relationship with utility companies, and there are things they are meant to do when they have to apply to us for work unless it's emergency work. They have to get permission of us to work on the highway, and they have to tell us when and where they're going to work, a period of time, and make sure that they're compliant with all the requests that we tell them. But is it faultless? No. I mean, it's been a little bit of a bugbear of mine at times that quite often utility companies should be more often displaying who's doing the work, because every time I drive past a set of roadworks, and if I know it's not the council, I'm looking to see the signage to see what utility company it is, because I believe, you know, they should be signing it, because whenever people are stuck on traffic lights, temporary traffic lights, they sit there blaming the council for the hold-ups and the roadworks. And probably in most cases, it's not the council carrying out that work. So there is, I mean, they do it, but they don't always do it religiously or obviously on every occasion. So that's something that I would like to see an improvement on. And our guys who liaise with the utility companies are fully aware of that. Yeah, so once they finish the work afterwards, and the way they leave the surface, the highway, or the whatever they've been digging up the pavement, it is inspected by our inspectors, and it is expected to meet the standards that we do, because we will fine or call them back to reinstate the work to our standard. So that's not unheard of or unusual either. But you know, I believe there is an opportunity always for improvement in this area, not in all of it. And I have been made aware by councillors previously on the point about sometimes they pack up and leave, and they leave some of these A-frames and that lying about. And the only thing I'd say to any councillor, I mean, if you see that in a ward, report it to us and we will get them to remove it, because that might have been something that the guys didn't pick up on the inspection because they focus in on the road and making sure that they've done everything properly. But they are meant to leave it as they found it, you know. So, and we shouldn't accept anything less than that. So I'm quite sort of fine with councillors reporting these incidents if it isn't up to your expectation, or it's been left in a state that wasn't as good as before. Please let us know, and then our guys can go out there and check on it and get them to come back and reinstate the work. And as I said, that's happened before, and I'm sure that will happen in the future. But you have eyes and ears as well, so if you have evidence of that, please let us know.
Okay, thanks, Mark. As I say, I know that the work was carried out within bridge work within my ward, and signs were there 3 weeks afterwards, you know what I mean? But it was the council that people were pointing the finger at, you know?
Exactly.
And that's why I sort of raised the question today about the actual, you know, work and relationships. Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
I discovered a few weeks ago that the barriers are colour-coded. So blue is Welsh water, I think red is electricity, and yellow is gas.
Oh, well, you know more than I do, Councillor.
Well, I was in conversation with one of the foremen, and he told me this. I was saying, is this one of yours? No, it's yellow, he said. It's gas. So,
all right.
That's always useful to know that, apparently.
Yeah, we need to tell all the public that, because, yeah, I mean, look, you know, and gas and all of those should be signposts in this to say they're carrying out the work on, you know, it's essential work. People generally understand that roadworks, you know, with Gas Board, for example, are putting new connections in. That's something, you know, we support that. That's something we should encourage and look to support them. But all I want is them to say this is Gas Board working here, or the electricity company, or water working here, so that when people pull up at these stops and are held up and delayed, they're fully aware that this is not the council delaying their journey, or, you know.
Yeah. Okay. I think Bob Fennick wants to come in to contradict me on the colouring. Bob.
You may contradict me as well, Chair. So.
Yeah, no, you're not far off on the colouring. Blue is water. Red tends to be electric. Yellow can be anybody, including the council.
Okay.
The statutory requirement for undertakers to notify works is a small sign with a phone number on it to say who the promoter of the works is. So it doesn't actually have to say Welsh Water. It just has to say who to contact for the works, and that's what our problem is. So we can't force them in terms of legislation, but we are working on them, and we have started to print our own signs off what I intend to staple to the barriers. So if we will take Welsh Water signs and put them on the Welsh Water barriers if it comes to that. So we're just trying to force the issue, and we are raising it at the National Hawk, which is let's say the national meeting with all utilities and councils. And Dean, our Streetworks manager, has been asked to represent Wales nationally on the Hawk, because he's very well thought of across Wales and the way he deals with people. Just to answer the question a little bit further, it's around 30,000 works notices we get every year for Streetworks, so it's a massive amount of work. We can't cover everything, and there will obviously be slippages. We have around 8,000 excavations a year from statutory undertakers as well. So again, 3 officers, 8,000 excavations. It's obviously only a sample we do. We can sample up to around 10% of the works. We do a coring regime on these for a certain number of schemes of each type. And whenever those reinstatements fail, we fine them. There's quite a bit of money coming back into the authority, and I can give figures if you really want them. after the meeting in terms of what we bring back in terms of coring. It's quite a technical procedure, but we do punish them. And where signs are left out, if we are notified and it's clearly identified that a particular utility has left signs on site, that means that they haven't cleared the site, which means that their works have overrun, which means we can fine them. So knowing about the signs that are left rather than just having them picked up really helps us, because we can warn, and we don't like to charge for everything because obviously we want to work with these guys, but we can fine them technically if they leave signs behind for an excessive period of time. I thought that would help.
That's very helpful, Bob. I think those figures would be useful if you could send those to us after the meeting, just so we can see what sort of flow of cash is involved in here, I think. Yeah, excellent. Okay. Thanks for that. Right, Councillor Sue Jones on highway maintenance.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark, for listening to me. It's regarding resurfacing work that's been carried out. Should we expect like-for-like measures to be reinstated? The reason I ask this, and I'm really pleased the Sterry Road has been resurfaced, it's tremendous, but the roundabout outside the co-op hasn't been lifted, raised, and it's causing huge issues with traffic cutting the roundabout. I've no idea why it wasn't re-raised.
Okay, well, thanks, Sue. Thanks for the question. I wasn't aware of that. I know that I'm very familiar, obviously, with the roundabout, but I mean, Bob may be able to step in here because Bob's responsible for I'm very familiar with the recent resurfacing we've done of that area, and it was a raised roundabout, and it's now just a painted surface, is it?
Yes, and it's causing big problems because people are cutting across the roundabout.
Yeah, well, they would if it wasn't raised. They would cut. They just drive over it effectively. So
well,
I don't know if Bob is aware of. There could be an explanation for that. Yeah. I'm not aware of it. So, Bob, are you familiar with this?
Just checking my microphone's on. I'm not aware of the specific scheme, and I will obviously check on the specifics. Generally, we put back like for like. Raised roundabouts are one of the areas we don't always put back like for like, because actually there was originally no requirement to raise them. Now, the reason a roundabout is generally whited in, so we put in a mini roundabout, is generally because there's not enough room to put a proper roundabout that everyone can go round. Right. So there, to a degree, with a mini roundabout, there is expected to be a small some amount of cutting, and we find that if roundabouts are raised, the materials used don't last very well. It's much easier for us and much more maintainable for a flat surface. Obviously, if there's a road safety issue, then we can look at it, and I'm certainly not against going back and raising something, because we're talking about lining materials and surface treatment, so it's after work, it's not anything abortive, but I can certainly look at that one specifically. But generally we would put that like for like, unless there is a reason like that. We do tend to try and flatten roundabouts because it saves on maintenance, unless there's a safety issue. Okay.
I know it took me a while to get the roundabout raised because there was an issue when it was first established there, and now we're back to the original complaint about people cutting the roundabout and causing huge problems. So thank you for that.
Well, I'll respond in more detail some other time. Follow up, yeah.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Right, Mike White, highway, trees, vegetation, etc.
Yes, sorry, Mark. Yes, why I raised this obviously is it's obviously been touched on earlier on by cabinet member about flooding issues and that. But we have issues where we've got land owned by private landowners of trees which overhang the public highway, and consequently then through leaf fall and obviously branches that do come off the tree, they eventually end up in our drains, which then leads obviously to a flooding problem, and as it is then a major problem, especially around autumn time. But as I say, really, if there is a responsibility on the private landowners that they have to maintain and cut the trees from the overhang of the highways. What measures have we got as a council to make sure that this can be enforced on them?
Mark?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor White. The difficulty we got is we can only work with the legislation that is afforded to us. So there's legislation that prevents obstruction of the highway or the footway. So if trees or any other thing is protruding from a private residence that causes an obstruction either to pedestrians, vehicles or whatever, then we can serve notice on that property owner to remove that obstruction. Unfortunately, and I do sympathise with what you're saying, because I recognise that, yes, leaves from overhanging trees are bound to end up into our gullies and our drainage network. But unfortunately, from an enforcement perspective, we have nothing in the armoury to be able to tackle that. As I said, unless it's causing a direct obstruction, then there's nothing we can do. That's the unfortunate state of affairs on that one. But I do sympathise with the question. And if they weren't, I'm sure if there were no overhanging trees on the highway, that would reduce the amount of leaf fall that ends up in our drains and blocking our drains and gullies and that. But unfortunately, at the moment, there's no power as such that exists that we could use as an enforcement tool.
I think, Mark, there's an issue about reactive work to clear gullies as well. I know that you're working on a rota and you've got teams working round walls, but you do get occasionally gullies which are completely blocked up. And obviously, if the councillor refers it, then hopefully that will be done fairly quickly. But there are a number of gullies which public report, and then they're not done until the next maintenance round. So there really needs to be, I think, a team acting as a reactive measure to deal with these particular issues that might help a bit.
Yeah, and that's part of what we've already got a cleansing project team that can be used for things like that. Okay, but we are currently and Bob will bear me out, we are still in discussions looking at further measures we can put in to focus on this area specifically. I'm not in a position, unfortunately, yet to announce anything, but I expect that in the coming weeks we will be announcing, further measures to help focus in on our gullies, drains, leaf fall, cleansing, that sort of area, absolutely to address this issue, which is a big focus of attention of us, this authority at the moment.
Yeah, especially as we referred to climate change earlier on and the increased flooding, making sure the gullies are all clear is going to be really, really important.
Absolutely.
As part of that. Yeah,
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Right, so you're coming back on cycling network.
Sorry, Mark. Thank you, Chair. What measures are we as a council doing to the new cycle paths, which are tremendous, to prevent cyclists entering into the highway? Because there have been real near misses on the new cycle path in Alderway and Gowerton.
Yeah.
And we need to be looking at somehow to either get these cyclists to dismount or slow down. And my fear is when this next section is from the railway down, it's going to be even worse, and cyclists are going to come down off a hill quite dangerously. I know in another part of the village, in the Bishwell, we've had 2 accidents within the last 6 weeks with cyclists hitting pedestrians and a cyclist hitting a car. So it is an issue for maybe us to look at.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, it's a two-pronged attack on this, I suppose. Yeah, we do, all the cycle routes we put in, we have to adapt to the Active Travel Act on them. And one of the things is, as people come off the cycle track, so we do look to put in gates or staggered bollards to break up the speed of a journey. And particularly on the one in Alders Way, Councillor Jones, I understand that we are looking at putting something in there in the short term. That's definitely being looked at by officers as we speak, because we have received complaints from yourself and a number, because it's been such a popular scheme.
Yes, absolutely.
But the other side of it, and I have said this repeatedly on previous occasions as well, is we have to put some of this emphasis on behaviour to the cyclists are using these routes. I mean, these routes are not meant to be somewhere where somebody can just really speed along regardless of the consequences. They are shared use paths that we are constructing, and all of these paths, they are not cycle routes, although they commonly called cycle routes, and I think all of us, even myself at times, have slipped into that analogy of calling them a cycle. They're not. They're shared use paths. They're designed for all users. They don't belong to cyclists, neither do they belong to pedestrians or dog walkers or any other, horse rider or whatever else. They are meant to be shared, and that's why we started this program of putting share with care or signage up. But signage does a certain amount, but it is down to people. We have to, get that people that these are not racetracks. They are there and they are shared, and there are many people using these who I don't want people frightened of using them, pedestrians of using them because of speeding cyclists or elsewhere. So we can do so much, and I think there is a role for the council here, and in this particular case we will be looking to do something to address that. But in a civilized society, we shouldn't have to be putting gates up to slow people down. People should be using them with due regard for everybody else, and but unfortunately it is, it's like the roads, isn't it? All our roads have got speed controls on them. Not everybody adheres to the speed levels, and that's unfortunate, but we haven't got the enforcement tool on our active travel routes or cycle routes or shared use paths to control speed, so we're reliant on the police on our highways to control speed, and I don't know if the police are going to control speed on a active travel route up in Clyde Valley or up in Blackpill or anywhere else, you know what I mean? So, it does need people to act responsibly as well, and I'm trying not to overly criticise, but that's a statement of fact. We can do so much, but the public.
I totally agree, Mark. I totally agree. Thank you.
Okay. As it happens, your comments about police controlling speed in the highways is a good introduction to Peter Jones' next question on 20-mile-per-hour zones.
Oh, thank you, Peter. You stole in my thunder. That was going to be my opening line, but there we are. Yes, Mark, you'll be aware that the Welsh Government is thinking in terms, under its new legislative programme, of making 20 mile per hour the default speed limit for all residential roads and similar across Wales, and thence, of course, in Swansea. As it happens, you may know, I live in a 20 mile per hour road, Delabesh Road, and I would observe simply that the limit is more observed it's not being observed than anything else. Cars regularly go along 40, 50, even 60 mile per hour, my guess, not to mention the motorcyclists. So there's going to be an issue of enforcement in regard to the 20 mile per hour limit. And having said that, of course, I welcome the proposal to make 20 miles per hour the default measure in terms of safety and so forth, and particularly outside schools and similar public buildings and the like, as in my road, as it happens. So what do you think the impact of this will actually be on Swansea, in particular in relation to the financial implications in terms of signage and what have you? The whole issue of enforcement, as you say, is a matter for the police, but nevertheless is a serious issue. And the $64,000 question, do you know whether there's going to be any funding to support this from the Welsh Government? Over to you, Mark.
Well, yeah, thank you for the question. It's a very topical question because actually, and very timely, this week, officers later this week are meeting with Welsh Government representatives to talk on that very subject, the outcome of these pilots, or it's about, I don't know if they've got the final outcome of the pilot studies, but the topic of the conversation this week is to talk about the learnings so far from these pilot studies that have gone on in the other 8 authorities. And yes, look, we've met as all cabinet members across Wales have met on 2 or 3 occasions with Lee Waters, the Deputy Minister at the time, during the last, well, it was 2 years ago now, when this was first mooted. And obviously, as cabinet member, one of the concerns I raised was the cost of this. So you've obviously got, nobody's arguing with the principle of slowing traffic down, because there are proven statistics that prove that if somebody is struck by a car 20 miles an hour, the chances of that not be life-threatening are far greater than they're struck by a car at 30. The facts are there but as an authority, yes, to put this infrastructure required, all the signage, all the speed controls, to change the 30-mile-an-hour zones to 20-mile-an-hour zones is we don't know what that number is. That's the first thing, because we haven't done the calculation on it. But it's way beyond tens of thousands. It'll be, I don't know. It could be as much as £1 million, but it's hundreds of thousands of pounds at least to do it. Now, there's been no indication, no agreement, or no refusal or acceptance, to be fair, at this point, from Welsh Government to say that they will or won't fund this. So obviously, you can imagine with all councils, because this is across Wales, it's not just a Swansea issue. I know that all 22 cabinet members are saying to Welsh Government with their hand out, where's the money for this? Now, whether the Welsh Government is going to pay out for all of this, I don't know. But it would be wrong for me to sort of expect, everything to come out of the central coffers. But obviously, those are debates that are going on at this time. And if that legislation, or when that legislation comes in, it's something we're going to have to look at, we're going to have to implement it. But obviously there is a concern about where the funding for this comes, and that's only natural. So agree with the principle of slowing traffic down, but obviously until the detail is forthcoming about the funding of it, a little bit nervous about the potential financial impact on the authority, and probably that's for all authorities as well. But I'm sure there will be a lot of debate to take place before the implementation of these schemes comes around.
Yes, thank you, Mark. This wouldn't be the first occasion on which a national government has legislated for local authority responsibilities and then not provided them with the financial support to enable them to deliver. Let's hope that they do. And thank you.
And I'm sure that, before it comes into force, we'll be a lot wiser in the coming months now, particularly when because I mean, what I'm expecting is the authorities that have carried out these trials will have already highlighted. So it's rather than me say, oh, this is going to cost Swansea a lot of money, they will have evidence of where they've introduced some of these schemes, of the actual cost of signage, installation of speed control measures and things like that. So it may not just be signage. They may have to introduce speed humps and things like that to enforce it effectively as well. So I'm not quite sure how those trials have gone yet. I've had no evidence. I've not seen any evidence out of those trials, but I'm sure that all of that is going to be presented to Welsh Government. So hopefully there'll be a happy medium to this, and there'll be a sort of a mutual agreement on a way forward for the future on this, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Most
you.
of Manston has been a 20-mile zone for the best part of 4 or 5 years, Mark. So I'm happy to sit down with yourself and officers and give you my observations on how effective that is. My suspicions are, though, because as you know, the current 30-mile-per-hour zones don't require repeater signs.
Yeah.
The highway code basically says if you've got lampposts in built-up area, you assume it's 30 mile per hour. And my suspicion is they're just going to say substitute 20 for 30. And motorists are going to have to understand that if in that situation, it will be 30, it will be 20 as opposed to 30, in which case it will be done on the cheap.
Yes,
but
yes.
My experience in living in Mantleton in a 20-mile zone, and Mike has got the same situation in parts of Landor, is if you haven't got repeater signs on the road, if you haven't got any calming measures in, and you haven't got clear signposting, it doesn't work. And the police don't enforce it. In fact, when it first went 20-mile Manston, the police refused to enforce, and they said their instruments weren't calibrated to enforce 20 mile per hour, though that has changed a bit now, but they haven't got the resources to enforce it. Yeah. And we're in a situation where a large number of motorists ignore it. Eaton Road is a very good situation, one of the widest roads in Swansea. It's a 20-mile zone, and you'd be lucky if cars do less than 40 on it. So, I think there's going to be big issues around how this is going to be rolled out. And I have had a brief conversation with Lee Waters on Twitter about this, but you shall see how it goes.
Yeah.
But hopefully it may at least encourage a culture of driving more slowly. We'll have to wait and see. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Right. Wendy Fitzgerald. Sorry, you've been waiting a bit, Wendy.
That's all right. Thank you. Well, just to follow up really on the most recent discussions, do we have any clarity about what roads will be classed as 20 miles an hour? Residential roads, but if you think of Swansea, Carmarthen Road is residential, Mumbles Road is residential. So there are a lot of very main arterial roads that are residential. So are these likely to be 20 miles per hour? So I think that is something that perhaps at some point we can have some clarity on. But what I really wanted to ask about was relating to drainage. You know, the fact that it is becoming even more critical these days with climate change, etc., etc. But my understanding is that, you know, the drainage teams have been reduced significantly, and that they've only been able to respond to crises and emergencies, and perhaps not been able to do such regular maintenance activities. So I was just wondering, there is a regime in place that there are certain things that are inspected, say, every 6 months, every 12 months, every 3 years. Are we able to retain this particular level of inspection stroke maintenance, or have there been some reductions even in the most perhaps significant 6 monthly inspections, because this is of installations that really could cause a problem if they became blocked? Thanks.
Mark?
Yeah, well, if I can answer in part, Chair, and I can see that Bob is, and I'm sure a bit more on the technical data. If Bob will supplement my response, I see he's keen to get in there effectively. But yeah, I mean, over a period of time, we did see reductions in the drainage crewing because of budgetary cuts. But over the last couple of years, we have improved and started to supplement that with increased investment on our drainage crews and their ability to tackle these issues. Now, as I alluded to earlier on, we are further looking to supplement that and increase the budget that we are spending on drainage furthermore, and I'm hoping to make an announcement in the next few weeks on that. But in regards to the actual regime and the cleansing regime, perhaps Bob is better qualified, but yes, over the years we did see a reduction. That's been over the last recent years. We've been increasing that and plan to continue to increase that. But Bob was perhaps better placed, Chair, on the actual cleansing regime.
Bob?
Yeah, just a quick correction there. That we've had certainly since I've been in place since 2008. We've had 3 gully machines with 3 teams. We also had 2 drainage teams that were looking at ditches, grips, and that sort of things. That reduced. We went down to 1 team because that team was taken on to other duties that were deemed to be more important. So no reduction in the gully teams in the last 10 years, certainly. We have had an extra gully team given to us last year, or last year we finally got it in place. So we've actually had an increase in gully regime. We did a review some years ago and we looked at, as you say, a standard cleanse, a more important cleanse on an annual basis than one on 6 monthly basis for very few gullies. These are the ones that were critical to internal flooding and major safety issues. So we had a review of all 40,000 gullies to band them into the 3 categories, and that obviously takes an awful lot of work. That's been done. We are trying to complete that. We are focusing on the 6 monthly ones as the most important. The only times that stops, and we used to have a rota that said, this month we will be in Uplands, this month we will be in Morriston, this month we will be in Calais. That doesn't work anymore, because what we found is, in those periods of heavy rainfall, all our machines were being put onto reactive work and serious flooding. Therefore, 3 weeks of the Calais ward, for instance, was taken away by reactive work. So Calais therefore got a very small routine cleanse. So what we've said now is we will stay with a ward until we have done the correct number of gullies for the year. And if that pushes the program bit, that pushes the program back. So the only way we interrupt the program is reactive flooding. You can get times where we have some of the serious flooding we've had in the last couple of years, where it takes us 4 machines for 2 weeks to get rid of all the reactive complaints. So we do get really interrupted by reactive flow, and that's why we're quite keen to say to people, if you're going to report a blocked gully and it's just blocked, then we're not going to do it until we're around there on routine maintenance. If you're going to report a blocked gully and there is a flooding problem that causes a major inconvenience to people, we'll try and get to it when we're in the area. And if there is a block gully that is a significant risk or risk of internal flooding has got a major consequence, then we'll obviously do it reactively as soon as we can. So I think it's really important to say to people, if you're reporting something like this, block gullies, try and keep it in mind, the level of importance, and try and help us out there so we know what to report to. And obviously we'll ask people not to try and overemphasize, because the more time we spend doing the reactive cleans, the less time we've got on the routine, and routine is far more efficient. You can imagine if a gully machine's in the street and going up and down streets in the vicinity will do an awful lot more than if it's driving from, you know, one in Uplands to one in Morriston. We spend a lot more time driving than we do cleaning things. So that's a sort of overview of what we do. No reduction in terms of gully cleaning. There has been a bit of a reduction in terms of sweeping, but it's outside my area. That might have some effect, but I know it's being looked at. There we go. I hope that helps a little bit.
Bob, on the council website, there is a page where you can see the weed spraying rota. Would it be useful to have a similar page showing the gully cleaning rota and which ward it's going to be in which time, so councillors could refer to that and members of the public could refer to that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
One of the issues we highlighted as a future challenge with the ward changes, at the moment, we've got something like 800 gully routes because of the number of streets and the way that we break up each ward into 3, and then there's different types of 6 monthly, annual, whatever. It's something like 800 different routes for our machines to do that are all programmed in through our management software. Now, obviously, when the ward changes, we're going to have to look at all these drainage routes, because we tie all our maintenance are tied to wards. So we've got certain teams that are tied to particular wards for particular councillors who've got a consistency of a response. Now, obviously, that will take some time. And I know we're moving as well to individual assets. So each gully will have its own cleaning regime rather than, say, a load of gullies on a street. So yes, absolutely intended, but I don't think it's going to be for 6 months at least, if not longer.
Okay, it's an aspiration, which I think is encouraging.
Yeah, definite aspiration. Yeah, it's the one thing we haven't got. We did a gully review with CSS Wales. There's an asset management program going on across Wales that looked at drainage and how gullies were cleaned. And of all the recommendations they did, we basically had everything in the bag already, with the exception of a published progress list or program, and with the exception of the individual recording for gullies. It was the two things we didn't have. We're looking at both of them.
Presumably the weed spraying page is going to have to be amended for the ward boundary changes as well at some stage.
Yeah, I mean, that's not too difficult. That's just that's filling in when they've done the streets within a particular ward. It's not too bad. Patch is your other one that's got a bit major issue there, because of the way the programming works. It's going to take us an awful lot of work to change. But the gully regimes, I'm saying it's 800 routes, so it's surprising how much background work there is to try and keep these things automated. I mean, all our gully machines work off PDAs with an electronic route, and they log each gully in turn on an electronic system, so we've got a record. And when you start looking at those routes then being split in two or merged or changed, it causes a huge backlash.
So can I just say that I have had an experience where the gully might have been cleaned, and you know, it's great that the gullies are cleaned, but there is if you like, a distributor pipe. There was a distributor pipe taking the water from the gully to another main pipe, and the distributor pipe, I don't think that's quite the right word, Bob, but you know what I mean. This was the pipe that was actually blocked, which led then to the gullies flooding and properties being flooded alongside. So I just want people to understand that a gully may be cleared, but that does not necessarily mean a flooding problem can be avoided.
I would completely agree, and I believe what we do in Swansea is as close to what you want there as we can do. Most authorities operation a system we call splash and dash, which is they're allowed 5 minutes per gully, so they go in and clean it as well as they can, and they go on to the next one, or something similar. So they get through an awful lot of gullies, and they're clean on a surface level. Now, I can't take credit for this. Before my time, my predecessor Chris, he brought in a cleaning regime which was based on getting the gully working as best you can. So we do actually clean a lot more in terms of the gully tails and the connecting pipes, certainly than anyone else I'm aware of in Wales. The main carrier drains, they do block. I can give you an example where we cleaned the gullies on Oakwood Road following road resurfacing. We cleared them 4 times, and each time the blockages in the main pipe then went down the road. That was only capable. We're only capable of that because we had a gully machine tied to the resurfacing programme. But you are right. Carrier drains do block. Our teams are very experienced with this. We do have a camera team that does investigations. So where there are suspicions of carrier drainage, we'll investigate. We'll put a camera up there and we'll try and find out what's going on. So you are completely right, Randy. That's spot on.
Yeah, I've got a similar gully on Pentragethin Road, which I know you're investigating at the moment. Okay, thanks for that. Anybody else got any questions for Mark or the officers on this issue at all? I'm going to take your silence as being no. Can I thank you, Mark and Bob, and on the other Mark, I think he's there as well, and for contributing today. It's been very helpful. We'll write you a letter in due course with some of the points coming out of this thing. Thank you very much for attending today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks. Right, item 7. Item 7 is the Scrutiny Performance Panel Progress Report. And this month we're doing Education Scrutiny Performance Panel, and Councillor Lyndon Jones has provided a short report. Do you want to say a few words on this, Lyndon?
Yes, if I could, Chair. Thank you very much. If I could add 3 key areas that we are quite keen on, and that is that schools share best practice, because I think that's really important across the service. Secondly, support for children on free school meals, because we found during the pandemic they were the ones probably who suffered the most, and therefore we are that is often on our agenda, so that we make sure that we are doing the very best for those vulnerable children. And third, the readiness for the city deal, because that is really important. It will bring jobs, and we shouldn't second guess what business is doing, and hence the creation of the Swansea Skills Partnership. But also we need that skills partnership to engage with business more. So those are quite key. As you can see from the report, and a point you mentioned when we did the pre-meeting, we did defer the item on harassment, and the reason for that is, first of all, it is, and everybody on this call would agree, it's totally unacceptable in whatever form it takes. But what we felt was we wouldn't just rush in there. We need to take the right approach and get it right. So we are looking at that in September. And you know, we will keep you informed, but it's important that we get that actually right. And the other point, I think, which Peter Jones mentioned yesterday, was the issue about EOTUS, and we were concerned to hear about some pupils, some emerging themes following COVID, that younger pupils were struggling to engage at school, and part of that is very often they suffered anxiety prior to the pandemic and preferred the online at-home provision, you know, and in some cases we're finding it difficult to return to school. We recognise this, and it obviously depends on a number of factors, and people should only return to school when they're ready. But we need to rebuild that relationship between the pupil and the school, because it is vitally important for them to get back into that sort of form of education.
Thanks. Thank you, Lyndon. Anybody got any questions or points they want to raise on this report? No? Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Lyndon. Thanks for that. Very helpful. Right, item 8 is membership of scrutiny panels and working groups. You should note that Councillor Mike Dirk has come off Lyndon's Education Scrutiny Performance Panel, and also in 3.1 that all the existing conveners have been reappointed by their respective panels. Has anybody got anything they want to say on this report, or shall I move straight on? No, I'm going to move on then. Scrutiny Work Programme, which is next item. We've got here, yeah, right. Just a couple of things. So first of all, the procurement scrutiny inquiry is now recommenced. They met at the end of June to review their terms of reference and the focus of the inquiry, and are now gathering evidence. And the next meeting, which we'll be looking on the 17th of August, we'll be looking at tourism, destination management, and marketing, business and city promotion, which I think is going to be particularly important as we come out of the pandemic, and it's a huge part of the city's economy, of course. So wish for that on that. Anybody got any comments on that report or questions at all on that report? No. Okay, thank you. Item 10 then, scrutiny letters. There are no specific letters attached for discussion this time. So item 11 is the date and time of upcoming scrutiny panel meetings, which you can see they're coming up through August. And then the next meeting of this committee is at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, the 17th of August, and we'll have a pre-meeting the day before on the Monday. So unless anybody's got anything else they want to say, I shall call the meeting to a close. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you for a very constructive meeting. I think it's been very useful today. So thanks again. Thank you. I'll declare the meeting closed.
Good, thanks.